The last time he said it, "Your business advice is ancient." I could hardly contain myself. I should have said something then, told him off in front of everyone, but I didn't. No, I kept my mouth shut, tucked that insult deep inside me like a stone in my chest, heavy and burning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you rose listening from. It was Christmas dinner. The table was full, the kind of chaos you expect. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, my daughter talking about her latest work project, my wife asking John about their upcoming vacation plans. Then there was me, quiet, watching, observing, as usual. I'd shared a bit of advice with John, how to steer his company through these turbulent financial times, how to secure investments when everyone else was pulling back. I'd built my business from the ground up, survived recessions and weathered storms. But John, arrogant, dismissive John, just laughed. "That's ancient, Derek," he said, like I was some relic, some dusty artifact nobody cared about anymore. "You should be adapting to the times, not holding on to the past." The words stung more than they should have. I could have snapped back, told him that the business world wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, that the wisdom in the room was worth far more than some trendy startup. But I didn't. I stayed silent, watching him, his youthful arrogance all wrapped up in that smug smile. I'm sure he thought he'd won. The truth was, I wasn't angry. I was hurt. Hurt in a way I hadn't been in a long time. I thought about my journey, the years I'd spent building something from nothing. The early mornings and late nights, the sleepless hours spent in the office, the sacrifices made for the family that now barely saw the value in what I'd done. I thought about all the people I'd mentored, the advice I'd given to young entrepreneurs that had helped them succeed. I thought about all the deals I'd made, the foundations I'd laid for my legacy, and now here was this kid, this son-in-law, acting like all of that was irrelevant. Like experience didn't matter anymore. I stood up from the table, excusing myself early under the pretense of being tired. But I wasn't tired, I was seething. As I walked away, I could hear the laughter and the clinking of glasses continue, and I knew none of them realized the sting of his words had gone much deeper than they could have ever imagined. Later, I stood in front of the window, staring out into the cold December night. The city lights shimmered below, mocking me, reminding me of the distance between my past and John's present. I thought about the years I'd put into this family, into the business, and now this arrogant young man had the nerve to mock it all. I took a deep breath, my mind already turning, plotting, shifting into motion. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. That comment, that one throwaway insult, would be the spark. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let someone like John belittle my legacy, not without consequences. It hit me then. I could show him. I could show everyone. I had the resources, the knowledge, and most importantly, the patience. I wasn't just going to get angry and lash out. I wasn't going to beg for respect. No, I was going to take it. I would buy his company, and I would become his new advisor. It would take time. Yes, it would take planning, patience, and a quiet determination. But I would do it step by step, quietly pulling the strings until one day John would realize too late that his arrogance had cost him everything. My daughter, my wife, none of them would understand this right away. But when it was over, when I had the company in my hands and John's arrogance had been humbled, they would understand. They had to. I knew I had to keep it quiet. For now, it had to be a secret. But I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. John had underestimated me, and I would make him regret that every moment of it. As I sat back down, the weight of the plan settling in my chest, I knew there was no turning back. What began as a small insult had just become a mission, and I wasn't going to stop until I had shown the world. And John, that wisdom, even when dismissed, still had the power to crush the young and arrogant. I woke up the next morning, the remnants of last night's anger still clinging to me like a thick fog. The sting of his words hadn't gone away. If anything, they were sharper now. Your business advice is ancient. I kept replaying those words in my head, over and over again. I knew John didn't mean much by it. He probably thought he was just being playful, mocking me like an old man stuck in his ways. But that's the thing about insults. They don't always come from a place of truth, but they sure can plant a seed of doubt. I went through my morning routine, the hum of the coffee machine, and the soft clink of dishes doing little to calm the storm inside me. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I couldn't help but feel a shift. For the first time in years, I questioned myself. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had become outdated. I walked around the house, tracing the worn edges of the furniture, the family photos hanging crookedly on the wall. How had I gotten to this point? My career was built on hard work, intuition, and decades of experience. Yet, in one moment, in front of my family, John had torn it all down with a single dismissive sentence. Was I truly stuck in the past? Was my experience no longer valuable in this new world? I sank into my favorite chair, the one by the window where I used to watch my children play in the yard. The world outside was moving at a different pace, faster, sharper, more immediate. I had always prided myself on seeing the bigger picture, the long-term view. But now I wondered if I had missed something. The business world was changing. New technologies, new trends, new ways of doing things. Maybe John was right. Maybe I was stuck in the old ways, clinging to practices that no longer made sense. Maybe the things I thought were my strengths, my wisdom, my experience had become weaknesses. My heart sank. I had spent my whole life building something, and now it felt like it could all crumble. Then there was the other part of it, the part I didn't want to admit. It wasn't just about the company. It wasn't just about business. It was about respect. My daughter, my wife, the whole family, they had all looked to me for guidance, for wisdom, for strength. And now here was John, this young, ambitious man, looking at me like I was nothing more than an old fool. And worse, I had let him. I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly through emails, trying to distract myself. But then something caught my eye, a financial report for John's company. It was a regular report, something I had seen hundreds of times before. But today it hit differently. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The numbers didn't add up. The company was more unstable than I'd realized. I spent hours digging through the report, confirming my suspicions. There were debts, poor investments, a lack of solid leadership. I couldn't believe it. John was running his company like a startup, throwing money at problems instead of solving them. For a moment I felt a flicker of something, pride perhaps, or vindication. Maybe I wasn't so outdated after all. Maybe John's arrogance had clouded his judgment, and I was the only one who could see the truth. But then another wave of doubt hit. What if this was just the start? What if the company was already too far gone to fix? What if I had waited too long? The thought made my stomach twist. I stood up abruptly, pacing around the room, my thoughts a tangled mess. For a moment, I considered dropping the idea altogether. It wasn't just about business, it was about my family. Was this worth it? Could I really risk losing them just to prove a point? But no. The seed of revenge had been planted, and it was growing, becoming something I couldn't ignore. If I walked away now, it would be admitting defeat. I wasn't ready to do that. I couldn't let John's arrogance define me. I had spent my whole life building something of value, and I wasn't going to let some young upstart take it from me. Not without a fight. The doubt began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. No matter what, I would show him. I would show everyone that experience had its place in this world, even if it was hard to see through the noise of youth and ambition. I picked up the phone and texted my old business partner, Roger. We need to talk. I have a plan. I wasn't going to let this slip by. It was time to act. Slowly, carefully, methodically. But first, I had to confront my own fears. I had to ask myself, was I doing this for the company, for my family, or was I doing it for me? I didn't waste any time. After texting Roger, we set up a meeting for the next day. I knew what I had to do now. It wasn't just about buying the company. It was about taking back control. And I wasn't going to rely on anyone else's judgment. This was my move, and it needed to be flawless. As I sat in the conference room the next morning, Roger laid out the numbers. His company was handling the finances for my investments, and over the years he'd become a trusted advisor. You've done your homework, Derek, Roger said, adjusting his glasses, his voice tinged with concern. But I gotta say, the numbers don't lie. This is gonna be tricky. John's company is in trouble, yes, But we're talking about a full buyout. You're not just taking back what's yours. You're taking a big risk. I nodded, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Roger was right. This wasn't a decision I was making lightly. John had no idea what was coming, and I wanted to keep it that way. There were too many moving pieces, too many risks, but I had to do this. Not just for me, but for the legacy I'd built. I needed to show that wisdom, experience, and long-term vision weren't outdated. They were powerful, and that power needed to be harnessed now. Roger slid a report across the table. Financial projections, potential investors, and most importantly, the internal issues at John's company. It all pointed to one thing: instability. He had no clue what was really going on behind closed doors. His arrogance had blinded him to the cracks in the foundation. "I've looked into this for you," Roger continued, tapping the report. "There's a lot of dead weight in his board, and I've got a few old colleagues who are itching to come back into the fold. They owe you, Derek, and I know how to get them on your side." That was the key. I didn't just need money to make this happen. I needed influence, connections, and strategic positioning. I wasn't about to throw money into a sinking ship without control over the course of the ship. I needed people who could steer this company in the right direction. People who understood what it took to build something lasting. People who knew how to navigate through rough waters. Roger left me alone to digest the information, but my mind was already working. I went back to my office and started reviewing John's company from every angle. I pulled out old reports, contracts, and financial statements. Everything I needed was right in front of me. All I had to do was connect the dots. Over the next few weeks, I kept everything quiet. I didn't say a word to anyone, especially not my daughter. I couldn't. She would never understand why I was going after John like this, not yet. But this wasn't about vengeance for the sake of vengeance. This was about proving that my experience had value, that I wasn't some old fool. No, I was a force to be reckoned with. I met with legal advisors, making sure every step I took was above board. The last thing I needed was to get tangled in some lawsuit. My plan was to be as invisible as possible until the final reveal. Everything had to be calculated, precise. No room for error. Every document I reviewed, every email I sent, every meeting I took, everything was meticulously planned. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator to look deeper into John's company. There were too many blind spots, too many unanswered questions. I needed to know everything, especially the internal problems John had been hiding. How deep did the financial mismanagement go? What kind of contracts had been signed that could come back to haunt him? And most importantly, what kind of leverage could I use to ensure a smooth transition once I was in control? It didn't take long for my PI to dig up some crucial details. Hidden debts, unreported loans, overpromised projections. John had been playing a dangerous game, all while wearing a mask of success. He thought he had it all figured out, but behind the shiny surface, the cracks were deeper than he could ever have imagined. I carefully took note of everything, making sure I had all the evidence I needed to turn the tide in my favor. A few late-night phone calls later, I secured the backing I needed. Investors who had once worked with me, trusted me, were eager to come on board. They saw the potential for a turnaround, something John couldn't even begin to understand. The financials were falling into place, and so was my plan. I wasn't going to just buy the company outright. I would buy shares in small increments, slowly increasing my stake until I was the one holding the majority. The beauty of it was that John wouldn't even know what hit him. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late. One afternoon, I sat in my office, looking at the paperwork in front of me. I could almost taste the victory, but I knew it wouldn't come easily. This would take time, patience, and a quiet, strategic assault. John was still running his company like a cowboy, and I was the seasoned operator, calculated, careful, with the patience to win the long game. Every move I made was deliberate, every step was measured. By the time this was over, John would understand one simple thing: experience wins in the end. The pieces were finally falling into place. By mid-February, I had quietly begun buying shares in John's company, using connections I had from decades in the business. Every move was calculated. Each acquisition was small enough to fly under the radar, but large enough to make a difference. I was careful. I knew that if I revealed my hand too soon, John would have time to retaliate. The last thing I wanted was to spook him. He had to remain oblivious for as long as possible. If he started sniffing around, it could derail everything, and I couldn't afford that. Roger kept me updated. Each week I received reports from him on my growing stake in the company. At first it was only a few percent, then 10, then 20. Slowly I was becoming a significant player, all without John having the faintest idea. The weeks felt long. My days were spent in the usual routine, meetings, phone calls, and paperwork, but my mind was always elsewhere. Every time I sat at my desk, I thought about the future, about the day when I would take control and make John realize just how much he had underestimated me. The more shares I bought, the more control I gained, and the closer I came to the moment when I would finally make my move. I started working with my private investigator, who had been invaluable in gathering intel on John's company. The deeper we dug, the more discrepancies we found. The debts weren't just mounting, they were dangerously high. There were contracts that should never have been signed, and business practices that could destroy the company if they were ever exposed. It was a house of cards, and I had the final push to bring it all down. By March, I was sitting on nearly 40% of the company's shares. I had the backing I needed, the power was shifting in my direction, and John was completely unaware of what was happening. At this point, I knew the company was mine for the taking. It just needed a little more time, a little more patience. In the meantime, I turned my attention to the company's board. I needed allies. People who were in positions of power but also understood how to navigate the rough waters ahead. I reached out to former colleagues who had worked with me for years. People who had been sidelined in the industry and were now looking for a second chance. They owed me, and I knew how to call in those favors. I arranged secret meetings, speaking to them in the shadows, away from prying eyes. Slowly, I began to line up a group of executives who could help me take the company back to solid ground. They were hungry for the opportunity to be part of something real again. They had the experience, the knowledge, and most importantly, the loyalty to help me restructure the company the right way. The day I took control would be the day I offered them a seat at the table. But there were still obstacles. Despite everything that was falling into place, I couldn't afford to get careless. John had a strong team, and though they were young and perhaps overconfident, they had the drive to defend their positions. The key to this whole plan was subtlety. No sudden moves, no bluffs. If I made too much noise, I could alert John to the threat before I was ready. I spent hours going through every detail of John's contracts, every decision he had made over the past year. Some were trivial, others were critical. There were deals that could be turned around, losses that could be reversed. But there was a lot of work to do before I could even think about turning the company's trajectory. And then the phone call came. It was from one of the investors who had been keeping an eye on the company. They had just received a report that John had overstated some of the company's financials to secure a new round of funding. If it came to light, it could lead to an investigation. The company could fall apart within weeks. I smiled. This was the opening I needed. The perfect opportunity to leverage my growing influence. It was a moment of weakness, a crack in the foundation I could exploit. I called Roger immediately. "It's time," I told him. "We need to move fast, but we need to be careful. We'll use this to our advantage. Let's make sure John doesn't see this coming." I had what I needed. The company was vulnerable, and now was the time to tighten my grip. I knew exactly how to play this. The next steps had to be precise. I was going to seize control, and when I did, John would understand the true meaning of experience. By the end of the month, I had the majority of the company's shares in my pocket. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed the full picture, the complete power to reshape everything. This would be the last piece of the puzzle. And when I had everything, I was going to confront John face to face in the most public way possible. He would have no choice but to acknowledge what I had done. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about showing him who was really in control. It was about proving to him that age, experience, and wisdom would always prevail over blind ambition. And when the dust settled, he would know he was never going to underestimate me again. By the beginning of April, I was ready to take the next big step. I'd secured the majority of shares, and the pieces of my plan had fallen into place. But the real work was about to begin. I wasn't just going to take control. I was going to reshape this company from the inside out, and I needed every advantage to do it. I met with Roger and a few of my closest allies. We sat in a dimly lit room, discussing the final stages of the plan. There were no more secrets now. The financial reports I'd collected, the contracts I had exposed, everything was ready to be used. John's company was teetering on the edge, and I had the leverage I needed to tip it over. We've got to be careful, Roger warned, his voice low, serious. If John catches wind of this before the next board meeting, it could all backfire. We need to time this perfectly. I nodded, already knowing the risks. Timing was everything. If we acted too soon, we'd alert him, and if we waited too long, we'd lose the advantage. But I had no intention of losing. I'd waited too long for this moment. For the past few weeks, I'd been laying the groundwork. I'd reached out to key figures in the company, executives who had been sidelined, ignored, or passed over by John. They were loyal to me, and I knew they'd be more than willing to help me take back what was rightfully mine. We'd been working in the shadows, gathering support, aligning ourselves with the people who knew the company best. When the time came, they would help me dismantle John's vision and rebuild something stronger, more stable. I had a meeting scheduled with the board of directors, the very people John trusted to run his company. It would be the perfect opportunity to strike. I wasn't just going to take over the board, I was going to expose John's mismanagement, his mistakes, his poor decisions. I was going to show them that my experience, my decades in the industry were what this company needed, not his empty promises of modernization and innovation. I spent the next few days preparing. I pulled every document, every email, every report I had accumulated. I crafted a compelling case for why John's leadership had failed, why the company needed to pivot, why I was the only one who could guide them through this crisis. I had facts, evidence, and a clear plan for how to restore the company to profitability. The morning of the board meeting, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I'd prepared for this moment for months. This wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to John. It was about securing my legacy, about showing everyone, including my family, that my wisdom, my experience still had power in this world. As I walked into the meeting, I felt all eyes on me. The tension in the room was palpable. John, sitting at the head of the table, was visibly uncomfortable. He hadn't expected me to show up, not in this capacity. He hadn't expected me to be so involved, so present. And that was my first advantage. He was off balance. His arrogance had blinded him, and now it was about to cost him everything. The board members greeted me cautiously, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They knew John's leadership was starting to falter, but none of them had the courage to challenge him. That's where I came in. I wasn't just challenging him, I was offering them a way out, a chance to save the company from the mess he'd created. I made my case, presenting evidence of the financial mismanagement, the poor decisions, the debt that was suffocating the company. And then I did something that no one expected. I made them an offer. I would step in as the advisor. I wouldn't take over as CEO, not yet, but I would guide them, help them restructure, and lead them back to profitability. All they had to do was give me control. John's face went pale as he realized what was happening. He tried to fight back, to argue, to deny the evidence I was presenting, but it was too late. The board members were already nodding, already convinced that his leadership was no longer sustainable. One by one, they began to speak up, voicing their support for my plan. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. John was out. He had no idea how to react, how to process the turn of events. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights. He had no allies left, no support. His empire, which he had built on arrogance and overconfidence, was crumbling before his eyes. As I left the meeting, I could feel a strange sense of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. I hadn't taken full control yet, but I had the board on my side, and that was enough. John had been dethroned. The power had shifted, and there was no going back. But there was still work to do. The company was mine for the taking, but it wasn't enough to just have control. I needed to make sure that John would never regain it. That meant more than just business moves. It meant protecting my family, ensuring that the damage John had caused didn't affect them. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But as I walked out of that room, I knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning of John's downfall. The days following the board meeting felt like a blur. On the surface, everything seemed calm, business as usual, but I knew better. The air had shifted, and underneath that calm was a storm that John wasn't ready for. I watched him closely during those first few weeks. At first, he tried to put on a brave face, acting like everything was fine, like he was still in control. But I could see it in his eyes. The doubt, the fear, it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. And the more I saw it, the more I realized how far he had fallen from grace. He had no idea how to handle the board's decision. John wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. For years he had been at the top, surrounded by yes men who only told him what he wanted to hear. Now, for the first time, he was facing the truth. He wasn't as invincible as he thought. The tension in the company grew. Employees began whispering, wondering what would happen next. John's leadership was crumbling, and no one was quite sure how to react. The staff that had once followed him loyally began to look to me, subtly shifting their allegiance. They wanted stability, and I was the one offering it. John wasn't blind to this. He could feel the shift, feel the power slipping away from him. But instead of addressing it head on, he buried his head in the sand. He made rash decisions, trying to show the world that he was still in charge. But it only made things worse. He alienated key clients with unprofessional behavior, and he ignored the mounting pressure from the board to stabilize the company. His pride wouldn't let him admit that he had been outplayed. I continued to play my cards carefully. I didn't want to make any sudden moves that would send him into a panic. I kept my allies close, ensuring they were all on board with my vision for the company's future. I made sure the restructuring efforts were progressing, all while keeping my distance from John. But there was one thing I hadn't anticipated. My daughter, she had always been torn between her loyalty to her husband and her respect for me, but now the rift between us was becoming impossible to ignore. Every time we spoke, she seemed distant, almost as if she was trying to figure out where she stood in all of this. She knew I was the one behind the changes, but I could tell she was uncomfortable with how things were unfolding. She wanted to support me, but she also wanted to support John. One night she confronted me. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I don't know what Sep's happening here, but I can stand seeing John like this. Sep's lost everything. You Sep taken everything from him, and I don't know if I can live with that." Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I knew she was right. John had lost everything. His pride, his company, his position in the family. It was all slipping through his fingers. But it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about proving a point. About showing him and everyone that wisdom, experience, and integrity had a place in the business world. I tried to calm her down, to explain that what I was doing wasn't about destroying him. It was about saving the company. But I could see the hurt in her eyes. She didn't understand, and maybe she never would. The tension between us was growing. I could feel it every time I saw her, every time we spoke. I had no choice but to push forward. I had made this decision for a reason, and I couldn't back down now. Meanwhile, the company continued to unravel under John's leadership. The cracks were widening, and it was only a matter of time before the entire structure collapsed. But instead of taking responsibility, John continued to lash out. He tried to discredit me to the board, spreading rumors about my intentions, questioning my ability to lead, but it was too late. His words no longer had any weight. I had one more step to take before I could make my move. The company needed to be completely under my control. I needed to ensure that John's influence was completely erased. The day I took my next step came quickly. I met with the remaining shareholders, those who were still loyal to John and his vision, and I made my pitch. I knew I had them on the ropes. They were scared, uncertain about the future of the company. They needed someone with experience, someone who could stabilize things. I offered them just that. John had no idea what was coming. By the time he realized I was moving in on his last stronghold, it would be too late. But as I walked out of that meeting, something else hit me. I had made this personal. I had let my pride and my need for validation get in the way of what I really wanted. In my attempt to prove John wrong, I had alienated my daughter, my family, and I knew deep down that no matter how much success I achieved in the business world, I might never get that back. The question now was it worth it? The day had arrived. The day I would finally reveal my full control over the company. The board meeting was set, and I could feel the tension building. I had everything in place, my allies, my evidence, my plan. All I had to do now was walk into that room and show everyone what I had been building all these months. As I stood outside the boardroom, I felt a strange calm. I had prepared for this moment for so long, yet now that it was here, there was a part of me that almost wanted to turn back. But I couldn't. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to back down now. I walked into the room, my heart steady, my mind sharp. The board members were already seated, all eyes on me as I took my place at the head of the table. John, sitting across from me, looked different. His confident posture had been replaced by a tense, defensive stance. He knew what was coming, and I could see it in his eyes. He was scrambling, trying to hold on to whatever shred of control he had left. "Derek," he said, his voice strained, "what SIP's this all about?" "We SIP's here in the middle of a meeting." "I didn't SIP expect you to be here." I didn't respond right away. I just let the silence stretch. Let him stew in his discomfort. Let him realize that the game had changed. Finally, I spoke. "You SIP been running this company into the ground, John. I SIP given you every opportunity to correct things. But instead, you SIP ignored the warnings, dismissed the advice, and now the company is on the verge of collapse. I SIP am not here to argue. I SIP am here to save what SIP was left." There was a murmur in the room as the board members exchanged glances. They knew something was wrong, but they hadn't seen it like this before. This wasn't just a simple leadership change. It was a complete upheaval. John tried to interject, his voice rising in frustration. "What are you talking about? This company is thriving. The market SEP's changing, and we SEPs are adjusting. We SEP got a vision for the future. You can SEPs just barge in here." "Enough," I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. "Your vision is a fantasy. I've been watching you, and I've been watching this company. The truth is, the foundation you SEF built is built on nothing. It is Bill's hollow, John, and I SEF here to fix it." I could see him his face flushing with anger. He was trapped, and he knew it, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. I didn't expect him to. I looked around the table. The board members were quiet now, listening intently. I had their attention, and it was time to finish this. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing your contracts, your financials, and your decisions over the past year," I said, pulling out a folder filled with documents. "And I have to say I'm shocked. You've mismanaged millions of dollars, signed contracts that have left the company vulnerable, and ignored every warning sign along the way. You're not fit to lead this company anymore, John." He shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You don't fit know what you start talking about. These are things I've been working on for months. You don't fit understand the market like I do. You start living in the past." I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. "The past is where I built my success, and the past is exactly what this company needs right now. Experience, stability, and a long-term vision, not reckless ambition and shortcuts." I watched as John's expression shifted from anger to desperation. He could feel the walls closing in. I could see his mind racing, trying to come up with a way out, but it was too late. The board was already turning. Some were nodding in agreement. Others were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, realizing just how deep the cracks went. I turned to the board members. "I've already secured the majority of the shares in this company," I said calmly, "and I've brought in a team of seasoned executives who will help guide us back to profitability. I'll be assuming the role of advisor, and I'm bringing in my own people to take charge of operations. John, you're out, effective immediately." There was a stunned silence in the room. John opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His eyes widened in disbelief as he realized what had just happened. He had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and now he had nothing left. "This couldn't end this be happening," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "You can set do this. This is my company." Seth worked so hard. You, Seth, worked hard to destroy it, I replied coldly. I Seth am here to fix it. I Seth am here to save it from the wreckage you, Seth, have created. John stood up, knocking his chair over in the process. But he didn't make a move. He just stared at me, a mixture of rage and disbelief on his face. His pride had been shattered, and in that moment I saw something in his eyes that I had been waiting for. The recognition that his arrogance had finally cost him everything. I turned to the board once more. I said I'll be taking over the role of advisor starting today. I said I'll be working closely with you all to restructure the company and ensure its future. We still begin with the most urgent issues, but we will fix this and we will rebuild. The meeting ended shortly after. John was escorted out of the room, his protests fading as he was led down the hall. The board members remained, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The company was mine now. But more than that, I had proven my point. I had shown John and everyone that experience, when used wisely, would always win out over youthful arrogance. But as I walked out of the room, a strange feeling lingered. I had won, but at what cost? My relationship with my daughter was fractured, and I wasn't sure if I could ever repair it. The victory was hollow, and the emotional toll of the battle weighed heavily on me. But it didn't matter. I had won. And John, for the first time, knew what it felt like to be powerless. The days after the boardroom showdown were filled with a strange, unsettling quiet. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the meeting had faded, leaving behind a heavy sense of inevitability. I had won, yes, but the cost was starting to settle in. John's departure had been swift. His once loyal team was now mine to command. They were cautiously optimistic about the changes, but the damage had already been done. John's erratic leadership had left the company fragile, and I knew the real work was just beginning. We had to restructure, rebuild, and regain the trust of the clients who had been burned by the chaos. But as I turned my attention to the company's future, something gnawed at me. It had been days since I had spoken to my daughter. After the board meeting, she had stormed out, and I hadn't heard from her since. I knew she was disappointed in me. She had always been close to John, and watching him fall had to have been hard for her. But this was bigger than just family loyalty. It was about doing what was right for the company, and I couldn't allow personal feelings to get in the way of that. Yet the guilt lingered. I had achieved my goal. The company was now in my hands, and I was the one holding the reins. But in the process, I had hurt the people who mattered most. I picked up the phone, dialing her number. The phone rang a few times before she finally answered, her voice hesitant, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. "Dad." She started, but then trailed off, unsure of what to say. "I know you set her angry," I said, my voice steady but regretful. But this was just about me. It was about saving the company. I had no choice. She didn't answer right away. I could hear the frustration in her silence. "You think this was just about business?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You took everything from him. You took his dream, and now you've destroyed our family in the process. I don't know if I can forgive you for this." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on proving myself, on showing John and everyone that I still had value in this business world. I hadn't stopped to consider the emotional cost of it all, the toll it was taking on my family. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said quietly. "But I had to do this for the company. For the legacy I built, I did some. Sorry you feel this way, but I can apologize for what I did." The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. I knew she was hurting, but I wasn't sure how to fix it. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now, but filled with a sadness that cut through me. "I don't know what to think anymore, Dad. You've proven your point, but at what cost?" I didn't have an answer for her. The truth was, I didn't know. I had wanted so badly to prove that my experience mattered, that I wasn't just some relic from the past, but in the process I had alienated the one person who mattered most to me. "I'll give you space," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "but just know that I'm here when you're ready to talk." She didn't respond, and after a long pause I hung up the phone. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I met with my new team of executives to discuss the company's next steps. We had a lot of work ahead of us. We needed to turn things around, fix the financial mess, and reestablish relationships with our clients. But even as we moved forward with the business, my mind kept drifting back to my daughter, to my family. I had won, yes, but the victory felt hollow. Weeks passed, and things at the company slowly began to stabilize. The employees who had once followed John's chaotic leadership were now rallying behind me. They trusted me. They believed in the changes I was making, and they could see the results. We were turning things around slowly but surely, but the question still lingered. At what cost? My daughter came by the office one day, unannounced. I hadn't seen her in over a month. She didn't speak much at first. She just watched me as if she were waiting for me to say something. But I wasn't sure what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can ever fully understand what you did, Dad," she said, her voice still carrying that edge of hurt. "But I know you did what you thought was right. Just don't let it tear us apart." I nodded, grateful for her words, even though I knew there was so much more to repair. "I won, Stet," I said quietly. "I said fix this. I said fix everything." But I couldn't help but wonder if I'd already broken something too important to repair. The company was thriving. My business legacy was secure. But my family was a different story. As I watched my daughter leave, I realized that I had won a battle, but I had lost a piece of myself in the process. The question now was whether I could ever truly regain what I had lost. It had been months since I took control of the company, and the changes were undeniable. The financials had stabilized. Clients were returning. The board was satisfied, and most of the employees had bought into the new vision I had laid out. Things were starting to fall into place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the victory felt more like a hollow achievement than the triumphant conclusion I had envisioned. The company was thriving, yes, but at what cost? My family was fractured. My daughter was still distant, still conflicted, still hurt by what I had done to John. I had proven my point to the world, that experience, wisdom, and stability would always outlast arrogance and youthful ambition. But now, as I sat in my office late one evening, looking at the figures, the reports, the emails, something gnawed at me. What had I truly gained? I had spent so many years building a legacy that I thought would be enough to define me. But now that I had the success, the recognition, I felt a deep emptiness inside. I had sacrificed so much in the name of proving my worth, yet my relationship with my daughter was hanging by a thread. That night, I took a long walk through the company's offices. I passed empty cubicles, silent halls, the place where John had once held court like a king. Now the company was mine, and it was running smoothly, but it felt like a victory that came at the expense of something far more valuable. As I walked through the quiet corridors, I thought about all the years I had spent in business, working my fingers to the bone, building something that could withstand the tests of time. I had always prided myself on being a visionary, on making decisions that were built to last. But the truth was, at least in this moment, I wasn't sure what was more important, the business or the people I had left behind in the process. I had sought justice for my pride. I had sought to prove my worth, to show that my experience had value, but in doing so, I had alienated the ones I cared about the most. My daughter wasn't the only casualty of my actions. My relationship with my wife had become strained. We had barely spoken about John's departure, barely discussed the way things had changed. She had been caught between loyalty to her daughter and her husband, and neither side seemed to be able to heal the rift. I found myself sitting at my desk, looking at an old photograph of my family. My daughter, so young, smiling up at me. My wife standing by my side. It seemed like a lifetime ago. A part of me longed for those days. The days before the company, before the ambition, before the need to prove something. But I had made my choices, and now I was left to live with the consequences. I had been so focused on making John pay for his arrogance, for his dismissal of my experience, and I had succeeded in that. I had taken everything from him, his company, his pride, his role as a leader. But what about my family? Had I given them up for a hollow victory? I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Was it worth losing the connection with my daughter, with my wife, just to win in business? Was the company really enough to fill the emptiness inside me? In the weeks that followed, I reached out to my daughter. I knew I had to make amends, that I couldn't let the divide between us grow any further. I couldn't allow my pride to ruin the most important relationships I had left. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about rebuilding, about finding a way to repair the damage I had caused. I asked her to meet me at the family cabin, a place where we had spent so many summers together when she was younger. It was a place where we could talk without the distractions of the company or the tension of our daily lives. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I had to try. When she arrived, there was a moment of awkward silence. She didn't look at me the way she used to. Her eyes were guarded, filled with hurt. I could see that the wounds hadn't healed, but there was also something else there, something that told me she was still my daughter, still willing to listen. I'd Seth made a lot of mistakes, kid, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Seth focused on proving something to everyone, including you, and in doing that, I lost sight of what really matters. I lost sight of you. Seth, I'm sorry for everything that Seth, I'm sorry for how Seth hurt you. She didn't say anything at first, but then, after a long pause, she looked at me, her voice soft but steady. I know you think you did the right thing. I know you wanted to prove your worth, but I can just forget what you did to him. You didn't just hurt John, you hurt all of us. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I know, and I don't know if I can ever fix that, but I said I'll spend the rest of my life trying. We sat there in silence, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. There was no company to run, no decisions to make, no battles to win. There was only the reality of what I had done, and the slow, painful process of trying to make things right. The business was mine. I had achieved everything I set out to do, but in that moment I realized that the real victory wasn't in the company. It was in the chance to rebuild what I had broken. My family, and that in the end, was the justice I had been searching for all along. The weeks that followed the meeting with my daughter were some of the hardest yet most rewarding of my life. I spent every waking moment trying to repair the damage I had caused. I focused on rebuilding the trust in my family, taking small steps to make things right. I reached out to my wife, had long conversations with my daughter, and even apologized to some of John's former colleagues who had been caught in the crossfire. But no matter how much I worked to fix things, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the damage was permanent. My daughter's forgiveness didn't come easily, and I understood why. I had sacrificed so much for my career, for proving myself, that I had lost sight of the people who truly mattered. The company continued to grow. Under my leadership, we made substantial progress, and the financial recovery was faster than anyone had expected. The board members, once skeptical, now respected me, and my team was beginning to thrive. I had achieved everything I set out to do in the business world. I had saved the company. I had shown my worth. But the victories felt bittersweet. As I sat in my office late one evening, reviewing the company's latest reports, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led me here. The path I had taken was so different from the one I had imagined all those years ago when I first started my career. I had always been driven by the idea of building something lasting, something meaningful. But in the process, I had lost touch with the very things that made life worth living: family, relationships, love. I stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It was late and the office was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional tap of my fingers on the desk. I thought about my legacy. What would people remember about me? What would my daughter remember about me? I had spent so much of my life chasing success, trying to prove that experience mattered in a world obsessed with youth and novelty, and in the process, I had alienated the people who mattered most. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built a successful empire, but I had broken my family in the process. My daughter had forgiven me, but it was clear that things would never be the same. The bond we once had, the easy laughter, the quiet understanding, was now fractured. Maybe time would heal it, maybe not. But I had learned a painful lesson in all of this. No amount of success could fill the hole I had created in my family. I thought back to the early days of my career, when everything felt simpler. There was no boardroom drama, no business deals hanging by a thread, There was just the work, the satisfaction of building something from the ground up, and the joy of sharing those successes with the people who mattered. But somewhere along the way, I lost that. I had proven my point to John. I had shown him that wisdom and experience could still change the course of a company. I had taken back control and restored my legacy. But I had also lost something important along the way. Something that no amount of business success could replace. The company was mine now, and it would thrive. But I wasn't sure that the victory was worth the price I had paid. As I sat there in my office staring at the city lights, I realized that this was the true cost of the battle. The recognition that I had been so focused on one form of success that I had forgotten the things that truly mattered. In the end, what had I really gained? A company. Yes. But what about my family? What about my peace of mind? Could I ever get back what I had lost? The journey had taken me further than I had ever imagined. I had achieved success, I had proved my worth, but I had also learned the hardest lesson of all, that success, without the people you love, is nothing more than an empty victory. I thought about my daughter Sip's words, "You've proven your point, but at what cost?" It was a question I would carry with me for the rest of my life. It's been a year since the boardroom showdown, and things have settled in a way I didn't expect. The company is thriving, yes. Financially, we've turned a corner that many thought was impossible. But in the quiet moments when I'm alone with my thoughts, I still find myself questioning whether the cost was too high. I've rebuilt what John broke. The company is profitable, stable, and well on its way to becoming a leader in the industry once again. I've made sure of it. My team trusts me, and I've secured the loyalty of the board. But at what point do the victories start to feel less like achievements and more like hollow remnants of what once mattered? My relationship with my daughter remains strained. She's tried to bridge the gap, but the walls between us are thick. I can't help but feel that my efforts to make things right have been insufficient. She's forgiven me in her own way, but I can't shake the feeling that she's carrying a part of the resentment I created. That's the price I paid for taking control of her world, and for believing that business could be more important than family. It's strange, really. The world looks at me like I've won, and in some ways I have. The business is mine again. I've proven my point to the world, and to John. But what I haven't proven, and what I still struggle to accept, is that I've lost pieces of myself along the way. Pieces I may never get back. I remember my wife's silence more than anything. She stood by me, but I can see in her eyes that she's not entirely sure where I went or who I became. The man she married, the one who built something from nothing, who loved his family first, seems like a distant memory. We've talked, yes, but there's always a space between us. Something unspoken, something that we've both buried under the weight of business, of my obsession with proving myself. The company is flourishing, but my heart is heavy. I thought that success would feel different, more fulfilling. But as I sit at my desk, looking at the reports, I can't help but feel a gnawing emptiness. I've achieved what I set out to do, but the victory doesn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. The other day I took a walk through the offices again, just like I did the day after the takeover. I watched the employees going about their work, focused, driven, but I saw something else too. There's a sense of distance now, a sense that I've become a figurehead, a leader by necessity, not by choice. They trust me, but I know they don't know me. They don't know the man I used to be, the one who didn't need to prove anything. In some ways, I miss him, the man who cared more about the people around him than the business he built. But that man is gone, and in his place is someone who knows how to win, how to rebuild, and how to dominate, but not someone who knows how to heal the wounds he's inflicted. My daughter came to visit last week. She looked at me differently now. There was still love in her eyes, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the easy, trusting love we used to share. There was a distance there, a hesitation, like she was afraid of what I might say or what I might do. I wanted to reach out to her, to close the gap between us, but the words wouldn't come. I think, deep down, she knows that I've changed. And maybe, just maybe, I've been trying to prove something that didn't need proving. It's strange how life works. We fight for things we think we want, believing that success will fill the emptiness inside us. But then when we get it, we realize that we've lost something far more important. I've spent a lifetime building a business, But in doing so, I've neglected the people who mattered most. I have my company. I have my legacy, but I lost a part of my family in the process. And in the quiet of the night, when the business is thriving and the world is asleep, I can't help but wonder if it was worth it. I've learned that revenge doesn't just destroy the person you're targeting, it destroys you too. You may not realize it at first, but it seeps into your soul, leaving behind scars that no amount of success can heal. And now, as I sit in my office, looking at the reports, looking at the empire I've built, I understand that the real cost of my success wasn't just about John. It was about everything I sacrificed to get here. I thought I could win back what I lost. But in the end, I realized that what I've lost is irreparable, and that's the real lesson. In life, you can't always control the outcome. Sometimes, in trying to win, you lose everything that really matters. It had been a few months since I had come to terms with what I had done. The company was thriving, the board had become more supportive, and I had reasserted myself as the unquestioned leader. But even as I stood in my office, looking at the reports, there was something missing. Something I couldn't shake off. Everything I had worked for, the business, the success, the power, was here. But in the quiet moments when no one else was around, I felt the weight of the decisions I had made. I had become what I had sworn I'd never be, a man who traded family for fortune, respect for pride. The cost of my revenge was more than I could ever have anticipated. John had moved on. He was rebuilding his career, slowly, but he'd never regained the position he had once held. The world had forgotten about his failures, but I couldn't. I knew he hadn't truly learned anything from this experience. He was too proud to see the lessons buried beneath the wreckage of his empire. The truth was, I had won. But in doing so, I had created my own prison. The victory that felt so sweet when it was within reach now felt like an empty shell. The loneliness was creeping in, and it was beginning to suffocate me. A new opportunity had presented itself. Another company, another offer. One of my competitors, a company I had once looked up to, had reached out to me with a proposition. They wanted to buy my company. They offered a substantial sum, enough to secure my future and ensure that my legacy would be solidified. The irony hit me hard. Here I was, the man who had spent so many years clawing my way to the top, only to find that the same people who had once dismissed me were now offering me a seat at their table. They wanted me, the very man who had once built everything from the ground up, to now sell it. To walk away and leave behind all the work I had poured my heart into. And for a moment I considered it. The money was tempting, the security even more so. I could walk away from this life of constant pressure, constant proving. I could retire, enjoy the fruits of my labor, and finally have peace. But in that moment of contemplation, something inside me snapped. I had fought too long, too hard to give it all up now. But then, the deeper truth sunk in. I had spent my entire life proving myself to others, proving that I could build something from nothing. But in the end, it wasn't the business that mattered. It wasn't the success, the money, the deals. It was the connections I had lost, the relationships I had sacrificed along the way. The irony, of course, was that I had proven everything to the world, but I had never proved anything to the people who mattered most. I had spent all my energy on the wrong battles. John had been right about one thing. My methods were outdated. I had fought a battle of pride and stubbornness, thinking that success would fill the void inside me, but all it had done was deepen it. I looked at the offer one last time, the paperwork sitting on my desk like a tempting escape. I could take it, retire, and finally enjoy the rest of my life. But what would I have left? More money? More prestige? Or would I be left with the same emptiness I had been chasing my whole life? The answer was simple. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. So I made a decision. I would continue running the company. I would stay, but not for the reasons I once had. I wasn't going to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was going to rebuild what I had broken, starting with my family. I picked up the phone and called my daughter. It was time to have the conversation I had avoided for too long. Dad? Her voice was cautious, unsure. What is it? I've made some decisions, I said, my voice steady. I've been thinking a lot about what's important, about the company, about us, and I realized something. I've spent too long chasing something that wasn't worth it, but I want to make it right. For you, for Mom, for everyone. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to try. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wasn't sure if she would say anything at all, but then I heard her voice again. Softer this time. I don't know what tasmag's gonna happen, Dad. But maybe this time you said you're making the right decision. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But I knew that at the very least I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to hide behind business deals and success to cover up the pain I had caused. I had lived my whole life with the belief that success could fill the empty spaces. Now I understood that only time, effort, and love could do that. And so I made my choice. I would move forward with the company, with the lessons I had learned along the way, and with the knowledge that the hardest battles weren't the ones fought in boardrooms. They were the ones fought within ourselves. I wasn't done fighting, but this time I would fight for the things that really mattered. The things I had almost lost forever. The last few months have been a blur of changes, some expected, others not so much. The company is stronger than ever. We've recovered from the mistakes, rebuilt the foundation, and reestablished our position in the market. But the real work, the hardest part, has always been personal. I've realized something that for all my success I hadn't fully understood before. No matter how many board meetings I lead, no matter how many deals I close, the only thing that truly matters is the relationships we build along the way. Everything else, money, power, prestige, becomes meaningless when you look back and see the people you've hurt in your pursuit of them. I used to believe that success would fill the empty spaces in my life. I thought that proving my worth to the world, to my family, to myself, would bring me peace. But what I've learned is that peace doesn't come from achievements or recognition. It comes from understanding who you are, from mending what you've broken, and from knowing when to let go of the fight. John and I have never spoken since the board meeting. He's off rebuilding his life, taking the lessons I forced upon him, and perhaps learning to navigate his own failures. I'd like to think he's learned something from it all. Maybe one day we'll cross paths again. Maybe we'll have a conversation that isn't filled with resentment or competition. But for now, he's gone. His time in the company is over, and mine has just begun. I've heard whispers in the industry about my decisions. Some say I'm a genius, others think I was just lucky. But I've stopped caring about what others think. I know who I am now, what I stand for, and what I've sacrificed. The truth is, no one else will ever understand the cost of this journey. No one will ever understand the personal toll it has taken. I've tried to make amends with my daughter, and in many ways we've started to rebuild our relationship. It's slow. It's awkward at times. But it's real. The walls between us are coming down, piece by piece. I'm not sure we'll ever go back to the way things were, but maybe that's for the best. Sometimes things have to break apart before they can be made whole again. My wife and I have found some common ground too. We've had long talks, late into the night, about everything that happened. There are still moments of tension, of unspoken words hanging in the air, but we're learning how to move forward together. Slowly but surely, we're finding our way back to each other. I look at the company now, and it feels different. It's mine, yes, but it's also more than just a business. It's a symbol of everything I've been through, the battles I fought, the mistakes I made, and the lessons I learned. It's a reminder of the man I was and the man I'm trying to become. The company's future is bright, but my personal future feels even brighter, because for the first time I'm not running from anything anymore. I still think about John sometimes, about what could have been if I had done things differently. Maybe I would have been able to show him that my experience wasn't outdated, that there was value in the past. But I can't change the past. I can only learn from it, and maybe that's the biggest lesson I've learned throughout all of this. If there's one thing I want people to remember about me, it's not the success or the company. It's that, despite everything, I tried to make things right. I tried to rebuild the relationships that mattered most. That, in the end, was what was most important, not the empire I built, but the people I've had to rebuild with. And so here I stand, at the end of this long journey, a different man than when I started. I have the company, I have the legacy, but I also have something more precious, the chance to rebuild what truly matters. The chance to do things right, not just for myself, but for those who've always been there, even when I didn't deserve them. Maybe that's what success is really about. Maybe it's not about the business you build or the battles you win, but about the lives you touch along the way. The people who, despite everything, still stand by you when you're ready to change.